Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Nicole Goot. Hello, Nicole.
Hello, Anna.
You have written this most interesting and illuminating book. It's called Yoga and the Five Elements. And I'm wondering what the background is that led you to actually look into this in the first place, and then and how it what it means to you now.
Mm. Oh, that's a great question, especially what it means to me now, I think. Since since it's been out a few months at this point. So the background I would say goes back to probably when I was interested in energy, just in general. My first, I think, experience with energy was as a young teenager. I was studying martial arts, and in that system, there's the concept of chi or energy, and that sort of started to open up my mind and my ideas about sort of this non-physical experience we have of ourselves. And from that, that developed and opened up, and I discovered Ayurveda. And in Ayurveda, it's based on the five elements, um, although it talks about it in a slightly different way than I do. Uh, but it kind of got me thinking about nature, which I love being in. I live in nature. I'm surrounded by woods, and so the five elements are always very much present for me, around me. I'm sort of in them all the time. Um, and through Ayurveda and energy and healing, that sort of spurred this kind of rabbit hole of discovery of what it means to see the five elements. And the way I talk about them is Earth being the first, if we go from the material to the non-material realm. So earth, water, air, fire, and space, and how that reflects in us, and how we are sort of reflected in what we experience. So the microcosmic universe. So it was all sort of this connected journey that started kind of early on and just developed as I grew. And sort of what it means to me now is, gosh, I mean, it's continuing really. I still see myself looking at my life through the lens of the elements every day, through relationships, through conversations, through the way things manifest in my life. So I think it's just a deepening of that early exploration that's continuing. Yeah, I think just this continued relationship, I would say.
You mentioned Ayurveda, and many people will have heard the term, others won't have heard it at all. Few know what it actually means. So can you explain that for the audience?
Sure. My understanding of Ayurveda is that the term itself, so Veda is knowledge. That's the basis, and Aryu is life. So it's the knowledge or the or a philosophy and a way of being according to the natural life as we experience it. And it's an allopathic system of healing that comes out of India, although it has branches that have you can see relationships in other parts of Southeast Asia. So like in the Tibetan system of medicine and healing, as I've kind of see some relationships there. And Ayurveda is all about balance. Um, and the theory is, like increases like and opposites decrease. So there's a practice of looking at, do you have too much of something and how to reduce that? And this interplay of energies through your lifestyle, your diet, how your thoughts are really working sort of also in the mind so it's a whole system of healing, and uh, also using herbs and herbal applications, uh, looking at how different herbs or different foods all have different kinds of energies, and how you can use those to bring balance. So, foods, as we know, I think food is healing, or it can be, like anything, depends on how it's applied. Uh, but food can be applied in a way to also heal, so from the inside out. Um, and that's my understanding of Ayurveda.
Yes, and there are distinct parallels with the traditional Western astrology of, or medical astrology rather, the
Mm.
idea of balancing the system, understanding, and yes, the elements play an important part there too. So where does yoga fit in?
I I would have to ask, what do you mean? Where does yoga fit in?
Well, your title is Yoga and the Five Elements.
I
And
see. Okay.
so we were talking about Ayurvedic medicine, and but you haven't used the word yoga yet. And I think
Mm.
there needs to be a clarification of what yoga actually is, just in case people are just thinking about poses.
Hmm. Yes. So exactly. I think that's where I wanted to clarify what you meant too, because the book is very much not a physical practice book. There's certainly a component, a very small component in one chapter in the book where there is a relationship to the body, because earth is very much an element that's connected to the sense of groundedness that we experience and embodying that in the physical sense. But yoga is, at least the way I think of it, is that it's a it's a practical philosophy, and a path for a way that you can approach your life. And if we look at the word, the way it's often translated as union, what does that union mean? And I think of that union as all levels of our being. And all of our levels of our being is from our physical body to our emotional body to our mental body to our spiritual body. So all aspects of ourself coming into complete alignment uh, with oneself. Um, and yoga as a path for doing that is a way of illuminating and highlighting those areas that we can't see. We all have blind spots in our consciousness, things that our shadows that we just can't see all the time. It's temporary, but eventually we're able to shed light on that. And so illuminating that in ourselves. And when we can shed light, uh, it's easier to bring these sort of disconnected parts of ourselves into greater alignment, into wholeness. So I'll finish on that point. I'll say yoga is a wholeness.
Yeah, that was the word that was coming to my mind as well. And
Hmm.
it's really important that people understand because in the West, people tend to see yoga as a form of exercise, and it is not just a form of exercise. It's to just take that out of the philosophy from which it comes is it seems odd to me, or it seems wrong in some way. It's like the notion of fast food again, where you're divorcing something or cutting something off from its actual
Hmm.
origin, and the very thing that gives it a sense of healing. So it's really important because although it's wonderful as a physical discipline, the part that we know as a physical discipline is wonderful. It's it's something much deeper than that, much more important than that. So that's why I wanted to clarify that part of the
Hmm.
title. So you've touched on the five elements, and it would be good to get a sense from you what the elements actually are about. You've named them. Tell us
Hmm.
about in a bit more detail.
Sure. So each element I think of as representing a particular kind of energy. Uh, so Earth, as I mentioned, represents groundedness, but it's also connected to the subtle bodies. So you have vitality and wellness. Um, Water is connected with flow, but it's also connected to our emotions and our inner life and our inner dream life. And as I talk about water and emotions, you can start to feel the relationship actually between those things: earth, groundedness, embodiment, vitality, wellness, water, emotions, flow, um, uh, unobstructed expression, true expression. Uh, Air would be next, and that's connected with our mind, and it's all about perspective. Uh, so when we have a higher point of view, we can see things, as I describe in my book, from a 30,000 foot view, uh, versus when we're sort of deep in analysis and we're kind of zeroing in, and which can be very useful at times, and sometimes it can be very challenging because we can't, we need to be able to take that step back. So being able to work with the mind in terms of perspective and using the capacity of the mind to be able to do that. And I'm moving my hands in such a way as to sort of almost like the aperture of a lens, sort of opening and closing, allowing a certain amount of light in. Um, Fire is connected with your life purpose and motivation and energy and enthusiasm for bringing your whole self, your whole being into the physical realm and manifesting yourself as much as you can, as fully as who you are, um, and having the energy, the life force in order to do that. And space is the element that sort of connects everything together. Space is, I use the term void, and it's not nothingness, it's a liminal space from which everything emerges and dissolves back into. And the way I describe it is integration. So, every time we manifest something and then something becomes unmanifested. So, to use a simple example, you buy a house, you live in the house for 5 years or whatever it is, and then you move. There's a process of dissolving, not the house itself necessarily, but you dissolve your connection to that experience and move into something else. And there's a period of integration. That's a really important stage that I think often is glossed over in certainly modern life of just move from one thing to the next, but rather having those moments of resting, integration, renewal, and allowing for things to manifest and unmanifest so we can move between um, these different experiences. And it's the same with the elements. The elements are constantly moving into and out of this state of expression and in order to create form and then outer form. And because I talk about it in the book from Earth first, because I work with it from the physical realm, um, we're always looking at sort of a movement upwards. But manifestation is always bi-directional. So there's a downpouring or an expression downward into physical reality, and then a sort of an emanation, and then a kind of a withdrawal back. And so that's how I talk about the elements in those terms. And then it's a question of how do you see them showing up in yourself? What's in balance? Because the whole premise of the book is how to find balance in yourself. That's the spiritual wisdom. And when you can understand how the elements are showing up for you, what the energies are, what's lacking, what you have too much of, um, it starts to tell a story. And, we all relate to stories. When we can see what that story is, we can shape it and move it and change it. And I believe we can do that by looking at the elements. And from the lens of yoga, because we're coming back to wholeness, balance is wholeness. So it's inner and outer harmony.
Beautiful. That's a lovely explanation. And I was listening to you, and again, coming back to Western astrology,
Mm,
um, we have the four elements again. What many people don't realize is that although it's kind of got erased from our system, ether used to be part of the Western astrology
mm,
system. So it was earth, air, fire, water, and ether. And ether is exactly what you are describing, that connective stuff.
yeah.
Um, and going back to Hermetic tradition, that was kind of, you could almost say that the stuff that God was made of. It's the connective thing that is intangible, the most intangible. So we're moving very much from the tangible to
Hmm.
abstract, ending it as in your description as space. So it's very interesting to hear that that is very much still a part of the Hindu tradition, the yoga and Ayurvedic tradition. So that was really good to hear. I like that.
Hmm.
So there is a temptation to value one element over the other. And people can get very snooty and look at Earth and saying, "Oh, it's ever so materialistic," and we're meant to be moving beyond that. But I think
Mm.
that this understanding of the essence. What do you feel?
I think it's very natural for human beings to get mired in the tendency of the what I call the sensory mind to be quite binary and to label one thing as better over another. And when we can see that everything is really just an experience, uh, then we sort of start to bring in more of the what I call the wisdom mind, so more illumination and a um, higher soulful perspective. And with respect to the elements, at least the way I talk about it, I think it's natural anytime we 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 look for a way to categorize and quote unquote systematize something in order to understand. We're in order to relate to the physical world, as if we think of ourselves as energy or spirit beings in physical human experience, there's this constant translation happening between our inner and outer experiences. And what are the symbols that we use to translate those experiences and to either express outwardly or to bring that information back in and then integrate it and do something with it. So it's very natural, I think, to take any kind of systematized framework and say, well, this is better than that. Or even within a framework to say, this has more importance than that. That's, I think, a very natural human tendency, but it comes from the sensory mind, which likes to label things as good or bad. And uh, when we work with the element like air or the mental body, and we start to bring in a higher point of view, we can see that it's not about that binary sort of labeling, but rather it's what's the essence that we're looking for. So yeah, in a sense, I agree in that the moment we get into that sort of tendency, we we can lose the essence of of um, of what it's trying to teach us because we can get stuck in that binary, and it's a challenge. It's to not get stuck in that.
Well, exactly. Particularly when it's the very binary temptation, or the very temptation to be in a binary paradigm is the very thing that creates an imbalance. Because the reason we have the five elements is because all of them are equally important, and
Hmm.
and the aim is to integrate all of them and help and have them working as a whole together. So how would someone get a sense that they were too much in one element or not enough in another?
Uh, so part of that I explain in Yoga and the Five Elements. Once you start to understand what each element represents, uh, and there are practices in the book that invite self-reflection, and that's a really important step, I think, just in life in general, is to have that element of self-reflection and self-awareness, and to hone that and cultivate that. Part of what the way I do that is I recommend a journal. It's one of my favorite simple practices because you don't need much to do that, but it's a really excellent way of emptying out your mind, your thoughts, and being able to reflect back because you can read back what's on the page, what you've written. Um, so part of it is through the practices, part of it is through understanding what the elements represent. And some of the exercises also involve uh, starting to work with those energies. So figuring out, for example, what element you tend to uh, resonate with more strongly. In other words, that's the element that you'll tend to favor, so to speak. And uh, uh, that comes usually pretty quickly. We all have a tendency towards an element that we are more comfortable with. For me, for example, that's water. For some, it'll be fire. But it's not. I say this, and in the book, it's not about that's better or worse. It's just really about a particular frame through which we have a tendency to, or a default setting that we see things through. And it has both a positive and a challenge. Positive in the sense that that's our comfort zone, it's easy, but it also often offers fuel for growth because often the thing that's easy is the thing that we can rest on. And comfort is, as the old expression goes, comfort is the enemy of growth. So there's a lot of work to be done there too to see how to bring everything into balance. So that's one of the exercises that I suggest in the book. So there's real practices that people can work with to start to awaken to an awareness of those elements.
So let's say that I am most comfortable with water,
Hmm.
but there's an element that seems to be missing or that is that I find challenging. What do I do?
It's a little hard to answer in just a couple sentences because I would have to kind of go into a little bit more detail about what the context is, uh, because it really depends on what are the life circumstances. So it requires a little bit more context, uh, to go into that. But for somebody who's listening to this and wondering, okay, well, we're in the book, again, there's a specific practice because I've taken you through how the elements manifest, what those energies represent. Uh, and then, it becomes sort of easier to start to see. So just as you have a default, you also have an element that you're least comfortable with. And usually that's the one that's lost. In other words, it's the one you least think about, the one that comes to you the least naturally. And usually, if you think about it, just even from a common sense point of view, water and fire are opposite each other. Water will put fire out, and water and fire can also create evaporation, so it can burn water up till it's gone. So you can start to see if you just think about the way the elements themselves operate in nature and in life, how that starts to show up. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, which is maybe a feeling of overwhelm, that could be for any number of reasons, and there's a strong emotional connection to that overwhelm, then what's needed is, well, it could be more earth to ground and hold all that water, or it could be um, a higher point of view in order to see where that's coming from, and then to find ways to settle that and move that through embodied experience. So, the book in a way is a bit of an introduction to in that, because once you start working with elements, it becomes quite interesting. And you also start to realize that each element contains the other in itself. So Earth is not absent of all the others. Earth contains water, it contains fire, it contains air, just as water contains every other element. And so it's not just a very simple, it is simple, but it can get a little bit more intricate in terms of sometimes you need to balance more than one element. I'll just say that for simplicity.
That's right. And that's good because that's what I was hoping that you would give us, this idea of how it works, because in the book you do go into detail and you do have wonderful exercises, but it's good to have a little bit of insight to begin to think about what to think in those terms, to just
Hmm.
about the balancing and what it means. And again, as you say, this is most useful because it is a reflective practice. And
Yes.
anything that helps us to reflect is
Hmm.
hugely helpful because it's through reflection that we have the
Right.
opportunity to gauge where we are and where we need to go. It's a point of reference where we can look at the world and go, okay, where am I right now? It's an orientation exercise. It's a bit like coming out of the underground
Hmm.
in a, and looking up and going, okay, I came out of that exit. Where is this in relation to where I need to be going? And
Hmm.
when you have those tools to reflect, that's what you're doing. You're
Right.
or you're getting your orientation back,
Right.
particularly in times when you've been confused. And even if you're not confused, it's just getting your bearings again so that you can move forward. So this is an incredibly important part of life. And what you're doing is you're offering us um, a framework through which to do it.
Yes, exactly. And that's, my hope with the framework is for people to be able to see that it's not, it's very easy to get kind of caught up in the idea that uh, um, this is how we judge experience, or we judge ourselves, or we judge others. But when we're working with energy, it's really neutral. There's no good or bad. There's no judgment. And that's really an important basis of the book, is that through the framework, it's because you're working with these, I'll even say archetypal energies, there is no, there, there is nothing to be judged. It's really just about looking at how is energy flowing, where is it stuck, and how do we get it unstuck? Uh, and I think that allows us to be a lot more understanding about ourselves and compassionate, and therefore also compassionate with other people, when we're not sort of caught up in the tendency that every human being has of judging, and that takes us away from that wholeness, that union.
Absolutely. The wonderful thing about practices like this is that it enables us to step outside of ourselves and be our own self-observers. And
Mm-hmm.
if we can observe ourselves a bit more dispassionately, then that's the reflective exercise, which then enables us to grow. We don't learn anything when we're in a heightened state of emotion. Um, if we're overly excited, well, we're not really paying attention. And if we're afraid, well, we're not going to learn anything when we're afraid. When we are experiencing that sense of being overwhelmed, we need to find a way of coming back to a more neutral emotional state so that we are able to reflect again. And that's what then enables us to deal with those imbalances that we encounter in life. So it's very, very important.
Yeah, I think it's for me, I would express it more as as the opportunity to integrate because when we have when we're moving through the normal course of life and we have, um, let's say, intense moments, intense experiences, heightened emotions, our life force is kind of like a scale. It's moving up and down. And really, what we're looking for is the experience of a kind of steady flow and experience of that life force moving through us, where we feel a constant sense of um, fulfillment and a constant sense of joy and satisfaction. And whenever we come out of that wholeness, so yoga, the sense of oneness and unity with all levels of being, um, we've sort of moved off our center. And coming back to that is these periods of integration, bringing back from those experiences through that self-reflective process in order to uh, kind of deeply at every level encode, so to speak, what we're learning, um, and have it really percolate through our whole system.
Just thinking about what you were saying, I just got the image of filling our cars with fuel. And imagine if our cars sometimes used more than at other times. What we want is that constant flow in for the journey to be smooth, not for the fuel to flood the engine.
Yeah.
Want that to be a nice steady flow so that it has the energy that it needs to get from A to B. And obviously it's going to need a bit more if we're accelerating, or but we want that flow to be available rather than it just being push flooding, which is exactly what we're talking about here. We're wanting that energy flow to be steady. And of course at times, um, there's there are hiccups, and we need to find a way of bringing it back into that nice steady flow.
You're right. And the analogy of a car is apt. You know, our vehicle for consciousness, we can think of as a vehicle like a car, except it's a non-physical vehicle. And that's that flow of energy that's moving. And at each level, we have, a different vehicle that expresses our ourselves, our being, our emotional body as a vehicle of consciousness expresses the relationship between the soul and the personality of we're uh, how our life force is being either increased or decreased every time we're sort of having ups and downs. And the thing with emotions is, and same with thoughts is, it's very much a natural part of human experience, and it's essential. It's fuel uh, for our growth because without it, we wouldn't know the difference between whether we were feeling upbeat or a little low. It would be a little bit more like a monotone kind of experience. So, again, when I talk about states of emotional experiences or states of mind, it's not to judge or label. It's rather to see that that's that's part of the learning experience, and then it's just going back to how do we get to um, how do we get to that sort of more steady, as you said, um, that steady flow in the car, not flood the engine or drain the battery.
Or drain the battery, indeed. Well, your book actually is so helpful in this respect. And just a reminder to everyone, the book that we are discussing is Yoga and the Five Elements. I'll be putting a link to it in the description box. Nicole, if people want to get in touch with you and find out more about your work, how do they do that?
I have a website. It's nicolegoot.com. And uh, they can follow me on Instagram. I post infrequently. I'm not a very active producer on that. I also have a Substack where I write, and I have a contact form if people wanted to reach me. And in terms of my teaching schedule and things, that's also listed as events on my website. And people can sign up for a newsletter and stay in touch that way.
Excellent. So I'll have a link to that in the description box as well. Nicole, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks for hosting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be talking about intuitive eating. Until then, goodbye.